brother. This guy right here is a hero of mine. This is actually Sergeant Major Walz. This is the highest ranking enlisted man to ever serve in the House of Representatives since the very beginning. And he is a great teacher. He a small business owner, husband, and a father, and a great member of Congress who has really made a difference. And if you have any doubt about his political skills, let me also tell you, he won in a district that President Trump carried, and he's a Democrat. So that ought to tell you that he's able to get crossover votes as well. So I'm so honored to be standing with you again. I really appreciated our time in the Congress. I think you're a great role model for everyone. Yeah. And I'm honored to hand you the mic and ask you to speak.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's too kind. Well, thank you to Chris. It's a great opportunity. You often hear us say in Congress, my dear friend, we're mostly lying when we say that. In this case, that is couldn't be truer. I'm a school teacher. My name's Tim Walz. I'm a high school teacher from Mankato, Minnesota. I taught global geography, and I was the football coach on the high school team there, and I served in the National Guard. And I got all fired up about politics back in 2004, 2005, and my wife said a lot of people just write letters to the editor. They don't run for Congress. But I did, and no one told me. At that time, there had been one other Democrat in 125 years win that district. I represent the district that stretches from Sioux Falls, right outside Sioux Falls, South Dakota, all the way across to the Mississippi River with Wisconsin. One of the largest agricultural areas, and home to the Mayo Clinic, too. So it's very diverse. It's also one of the last bastions of congressional districts that are somewhat 50-50 in terms of voter registration. And Chris is right. In this last election, President Trump won by 17 points. So I'm in the second most Republican district in America with a Democrat sitting in it. But we're a little different. We don't have Democrats in Minnesota. We have Democrat Farmer Labor. So our two parties came together, so I'm a DFLer. But when I won and came to Congress, I was somewhat naive in the belief. I used to teach little American government too. You know, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. I feel really bad about that because it's totally a lie. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. But what I found is this desire to try and improve people's lives, try and improve the way our society works, trying a good faith effort to try and get there. And I always believed ideologically that there was strength in having differences, but we clearly had the same values, the same shared values and goals, but different ways of getting there. And I think we know in our politics today that's a bit Pollyannish in some ways. It's not the case with Chris. And I think there were enough of us here, we started to find kindred spirits. Obviously for Chris and I, the connection point was service in the military to start with. But then it moved into, we had younger children that were still playing high school sports, things we wanted to get back for, and philosophically about how government should work, how we should try and find those areas where there is agreement, where we can move things forward, and then try and find the skills together to work together to make a difference. And it isn't just a cliche. The lasting achievements we get here are the ones that we're able to do together, the ones that impact people's lives in a significant manner. And you can nibble around the edges on something, and then you can go after the bigger things. And so when I saw when Chris told me he was thinking of retiring from Congress, I selfishly thought on this because there are so few left. It is true that just in all fairness, the structural issues in Congress, I don't know if Chris is in your book and some of the things as a society of what we're moving to, but structurally, this issue of districts that are so gerrymandered, they don't give you the potential to have bipartisan support is really, really damaging. But it also is the emphasis of the individual who comes there. And someone like Chris coming and that willingness to try and reach across and say, would you be willing to look at this? What things could we do? And try and move legislation. It still does happen. The potential is still there. And so when you see this book, and I talk about it, when I read it, my wife and I were talking about it, really, really profound at this point in our history to talk a little bit about this. And as a military person, when I saw the title, Rally Point, makes great sense. The objectives are rally points where you gather before you move on an objective to try and accomplish the mission. So in Congress, if talking about this, or as a society in broader, how do we find those rally points of commonality? And for me, I serve on committees where I think it's easier to find that. I serve on the VA committee as the ranking member. There's great, I think, consensus in this country that we need to do right by veterans. We need to make sure we get that right. How we get there is still can be pretty polarizing, but the desire to move those things is there. So I would say, first of all, trying to find the place of least resistance on what you're talking about, Chris, and the things that you've done, it's a good start. I also serve on the Ag Committee, which used to be a real unifying and real bipartisan point, because it wasn't Republican Democrats, it was farm state versus urban. It was Midwest versus that. The problem we have now in our politics, and I say that not just as a Democrat, there are 10 rural Democrats left in America. That's it. So the idea on the Farm Bill now, instead of having rural Democrats sitting on the Ag Committee to fill out that committee, and this is a good thing, this can be a good thing, but our Ag Committee on the Democratic side is made out of members from Boston, New York, LA, Seattle, and those, and that's fine. Except you wonder why there's that voice out in middle America that's wondering how do you find some balance, how do you get there? So I'm glad you're all here tonight. I'm proud of the things, and I refuse to believe that compromise and bipartisanship are vices, not virtues. I still believe it's not overreaching or thinking back to a time that was not as pure and simple as we'd like to think it is. There are people in Congress that are operating in good faith. There are people reaching across the aisle who might ideologically differ. There are people who are writing important pieces of work that you're seeing in here tonight that are trying to bridge this gap, trying to understand it, and not in just I watched the dang news shows trying to analyze what happened in middle America, what happened to the election. I went to one where Democrats were putting it on and saying, how do we recommunicate with rural voters in the Midwest? And the first 9 speakers were from California. I said, my goodness, that's going to be a challenge. And I don't say it because there's more Democrats in California. It's not like pejorative. What I'm more concerned about is less than how do Democrats reconnect with voters in middle America. How do we as members of Congress connect with one another? How do we as a society connect? And that's what Chris is talking about in here. How do we share those values or put some of those commonalities that we know are all there and find legislation? And we've done it together. Yes. We did it on things dealing with where our troops were. I had a bill. This is one that makes me the most unpopular member of Congress, but the most popular back home, my Stock Act. When the stop trading on congressional knowledge, where you have to now you have to put I'm sure that former HHS Secretary Price did not like me for that bill and others. So, but the idea was, and it wasn't that I believe my colleagues and folks who are here are somehow corrupt or not doing what they need to do, but the faith of the population is the voters don't believe it. So I said we need to show those things. We need to show outward signs of collaboration. We need to look at some of the values, and Chris puts in this work about how we as a society rally around those, and they're hungry for that right now. So it encourages me, unless you're all Chris's family and you were paid to come here, it's encouraging to me that folks would come out. You take a look at what he's doing, and I'm here, and Danny Lipinski is here too from Illinois, an Illinois Democrat, Chicago one almost. So that's a little different. But all of us being friends, all of us having commonality of what we want to get done, all of us having the willingness to respect the differences of opinion, and actually having legislation that move forward. And you would think, I'm a Minnesota Lutheran, and the saying, if you do a good deed and talk about it, it doesn't count. I kind of feel like, so what you do is you pay someone else to talk for you about the good deed. But I am here to say today, I think as a society, we need to tell the stories of where our common values are. We need to tell the stories about getting back to some of those basic truths. We need to tell the stories that Chris talks about in here that motivates him, that gets him going, that drew many of us as other members of Congress to him. And certainly glad you're here. So Chris, thank you. Congratulations. We appreciate it. So
appreciate it.
It's a nice looking tie.
And at least you think that this is some kumbaya. I'll tell you that this was real. Bills that we did together, President Obama signed. We did a bill that had to do with the strength of our armed forces, particularly the land forces, and it was initially not supported by leadership in either side.
No. And
we were able to build support over time, building out key co-sponsorships. And ultimately, because of careful maneuvering, President Obama signed it in the end. That was one. The other one was, he was the author of, and I was a co-sponsor of a very important bill for the mental health for our veterans. It was the Clay Hunt Suicide Awareness and Prevention Bill. And I was at the White House when President Obama signed that, and it was a great day. This was the author right here. President Obama took to the mic and he said, look, I'm surrounded here by the Hunt family. They're very conservative Republicans from Texas, but yet we can stand on the same stage. because they had lost their son. Their son was a great hero. He had served multiple tours, and he was haunted by demons, and he was fighting them. And ultimately, he succumbed to it. And so in this bill, we strengthen the mental health for veterans, and it's in Clay Hunt's name. And that was work that we did together. And also on the domestic side, it was mentioned the farmers. And so we think it's so important, beginning farmers. And so we were the co-authors of the Beginning Farmer Rancher Opportunity Act, which President Obama also signed. So it is possible. When I talked about we need to get back to the rule of law for significant change, it is possible, but it's just we're not in the habit. We need to get in the habit of coming together, because it's never easy on these things, but it is so important to us as a people. So this guy here leads by example and does that. And it was mentioned Congressman Dan Lipinski is here today too, and he's another great example, I think, of a public servant who really puts his service to his constituents ahead of any kind of partisan politics. So let's go back out for any kind of questions or comments from the floor. Yeah, please, John.
All the rage this week is alleged tax reform, which will blow perhaps a $1.5 or $2.5 trillion hole in the budget. Any thoughts on that?
So John's asking about the tax reform bill. Look, to me, I think the gold standard of tax reform is Ronald Reagan and what he did with Tip O'Neill and Bill Bradley and others. And that was bipartisan. It was pro-growth. It absolutely grew the economy. We went to 5% GDP 2 years after it was implemented. It was also revenue neutral. Okay, so revenue neutral meant that we closed loopholes, we lowered rates, and then when we got growth in the economy, it helped us get back to a balanced budget. So the concern for this week is that it's not revenue neutral. So at least now there is talk of maybe debates and amendment votes. I hope that happens, because we don't have a final bill yet to vote on. And I'm hopeful that there'll be an awakening that, given the fact that we're $20 trillion in debt, we need to make responsible calls, because I think the last thing we want to be doing is making a mistake like this. That, just to put a finer point on that, our interest, what we paid for nothing but to service the debt, was $457 billion 3 weeks ago. That was our bill. And next to defense, that is our second biggest expenditure right now, once you factor in discretionary spending. So we're on target right now. If we don't take a change by the end of this term, by the end of this administration, we're going to have $1 trillion deficits again. We can't sustain that. We're going to go bankrupt. So I'm hopeful that in this town, over the next several weeks, you'll see an evolution of that initial package. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think you can get it. I think you can get the goals of pro-growth, because we've seen it. Reagan's tax reform that he did with Republicans and Democrats in Congress was pro-growth, but it was also revenue neutral.
And they would find maybe some folks who want to work with this issue. Chris is exactly right. This is where the regular order matters. This is why the buy-in on both sides make the resiliency of it. He's right. In '86, they had 39 hearings, 450 witnesses. Took 290 days to get the bill. Went through all of the proper procedures. Went through all the subcommittees. Went through all that. And at the end of the day, it had bipartisan support for it. And you can differ on the ideology of where it went, but I think it's agreeable on this that most people got what they wanted in there, and it had a pretty lasting effect. And I'm in total agreement. This whole idea of pigeonholing one side or another, that Chris would only want tax cuts for the wealthiest, or that I'm tax and spend and don't care about the debt. That is total false prep. Where you start this argument. We are all for tax reform if that's not code word for anything. So I'm somewhat hopeful, but at this point in time, it appears to be a little bit more go it alone. But we'll see that it becomes harder, because you're going to need some folks to get involved.
Thank you. How do we inspire bipartisanship in this era where both parties, where every representative is to a large part control, they have to raise millions of dollars. How do we find that bipartisanship?
So one of the things I mentioned in the book, I'll add to the earlier comment, is the need for political reform, because most members already know they're not going to face a tough election in the fall, but they could face a tough election in the spring in a primary. That's right. If their scene is coming to the center. That's right. So we have to get at this issue of addressing the way that we draw the district lines. We got to be able to get at that. So, yeah.
I think that's a fundamental problem. That's just coming from me as a high school teacher, but I'm with you.
How about any other comments or questions of any kind? Yeah.
I would say on your bipartisanship, it takes an effort.
Yes.
Chris did that. He lived by what he did, what he says. He wrote it in the book. He did his time here. He developed relationships, and I think it's very important for us to model that. I have an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old. Try explaining politics today to them, and I'm there. Dad, you're there. Why didn't you do something about this? And I'm like, oh my God. But it is about, they have to see it in a genuine fashion of working together and the respect that was there. If you have a member who does this, in only a few short terms, they instill the trust and the respect, and we can disagree. But I really think you're going to have to, he's right, the redistricting and the money in politics, but it does start by the example. So
and one final thing I would say is to not underestimate our constituents, because when I voted for the Simpson Bowles variant budget, which was a hard vote, right? Because the tried and true conservatives, it wasn't perfect for them, and the progressives didn't like it either.
I voted for it too and got beat up on it.
We got beat up, but there was only 38 of us in a country that voted for this. And some of my colleagues, when I was in the cloakroom, they're like, Chris, oh man, we love you, man. You're going to get beat. You're going to get beat in the primary. And I kind of said, wow, geez. And then I said, no, wait, that isn't going to happen. We really believed in what we were doing. And so I went home and I found my mavens, the people who are always on social media, the folks who are leading viewpoints. And I asked to meet with them. And I explained my vote. I said, look, here's why I voted the way I did. I think it's so important we do this for future generations, and we're going to have to come together. You know what? These fairly tough fiscal conservatives, they went on social media and gave me a thumbs up because they saw that I believed in what I was doing, and I was doing it for the right reason, and it was hard decisions, and I was, the fact that I was giving my pension back voluntarily, so they knew I was taking the first cut, so they knew I was leading by example, taking a principled stand, and the constituents didn't fire me. So I think there's this perception is if you don't...
They told you to give back more, though, didn't they? I do that, too. I give back the raise, and they're like, well, that's only 10%. You should give back 20. And I'm like, no, but it is good.
Yeah. How about other comments or questions? Please.
How do you, you talk about redistricting and gerrymandering and all that. How do you do that in Congress to an audience that's the majority Republican and all the redistricting is in favor of Republicans?
So here's what I would say. I think that, I believe, you can probably tell, I really believe in what I believe. So I don't think I need unfair advantages. In fact, I lived it. I went from, when I first went to Congress, when I first got out of the Army, I was in a slightly Republican district, and then we had, our redistricting process took place, and they actually tried to collude. And they failed. They couldn't get together, the state reps. So my districts were actually drawn by independent redistricting in New York, episodically, one time. So, but actually, they did their job. We have more competitive House races in New York than any other state because of that. And I had a reporter come up to me and said, I noticed, Gibson, you never complain. I said, because I don't think I should be picking my voters. I went from a slightly Republican district to a district that voted for President Obama twice. So I was in, sort of like what he had to do, I was in a tough situation. So I think what you do is you just really believe in what you believe in, and then you don't worry about having to stack the deck. That's part of the problem, is there's a feeling that if we don't rig this thing, then our ideas won't resonate. I believe they will. I had Woodstock in my district, and I would go to Woodstock. Didn't win their votes, but I respected them and I tried. So I would go there. So, I think that's what we have to do is whatever we believe, we should stand up for that.
I'm taking a different approach. I'm going back and running for governor of Minnesota. But to make them fair, not to gerrymander.
Well, what do you think about the case that's up at Supreme Court?
I think there's a good
the Wisconsin
chance.
case?
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity. I think the courts are going to come down and basically call out the corrupt system we have.
I think that's the most important Supreme Court case in years. And here I stake everything that Chris is right, and it's people of integrity. I tell people back home, the redistricting in Minnesota of 2020 is absolutely critical on this. That's why I want to win, to make sure that it's fair. And I tell the Democrats, I'm not interested in drawing Democratic districts. I'm interested in making sure, because Minnesota, we don't do that quite as well. Iowa does it really well. You guys did it well. We're kind of, because we go through the song and dance, and we gerrymander the districts, and then it's thrown out, and then the courts do it, and they're fair. That's what happens in there. That's kind of the Minnesota way of doing things. Passive aggressive gerrymandering.
Yeah. Thank you. How about another?
Good
Yeah,
question.
please. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you both talked about the importance of cultivating personal relationships within, within the bodies of Congress to get sort of bipartisan legislation to happen. We hear about how sort of that's sort of on the decline. So could you talk about like what kinds of spaces?
Thank you.
How do you get to know each other? How do you talk with each other? What kinds
Yeah.
of spaces do you sort of when does that happen?
So look, that's a great question, and I'll just tell you all kinds of ways. PT, physical training. We do this ACLI run. He always beats me. This guy ticks me off.
I'm like freakishly fast.
He's really fast. I mean, really fast. And so also Dan Lipinski and I.
Oh, he is a beast.
He's a great runner, but also we went on a trip together. Dan and his wife Judy. In the summer of '16. I led a congressional delegation trip, and it was an important one because it was about this bill that we were writing as far as the posture of the armed forces. And so we were going to Israel because there was a very important protection piece for our armor elements. And then we went to Latvia, which is, Baltic state. We went to Poland, and we went to Germany. And it was a bipartisan trip, and Dan was my Democratic lead on that, and his wife Judy came. And so, we were together, except for the time we were sleeping, we were together 18 hours a day, 19 hours a day for 7-8 days. And so we broke bread together, we worked, we went through important meetings together, we had fun together. Those things actually forge a friendship, and I think that's really important. And look, there's other opportunities. We actually have lunches together. You probably heard, unfortunately, about the baseball game. I mean, it's really sad about what happened. But there's actually more. I would push back, and I do push back in the book. I say, look, there's a bit of a myth on this. Not to say there isn't some element of truth to it, but when members want to seek out and get to know each other, they can. And, I was one of those that I slept in my office. So I would see folks in the gym. Work out in the morning and everything, get a chance to talk to folks and see what's going on. So, and then of course there's things that always transcend, right? Like ball teams and bands and stuff like that. So you talk to people about that. So there's still a great opportunity for commonality. And plus, I have to tell you, we didn't always agree, but we would always trust each other to work through the issues. There were times we had to get through some hard stuff. And, and at the end of the day, we moved the earth and maybe we agreed on 60% of it. And you know what? That's important. Let's do the 60%. And we just said, you know what? We just disagree on the other 40%, and I still love you. So, and that's important, is to have that real, because it has to be real. It can't be fake. And so that means you have to really respect that he's a representative. He is representing the interests of people that are different from my district. And so that may mean that we disagree on some things. I think we have time for one more. Please, yes.
So background from where I'm from, I am a graduate student in history at Georgetown, so I'm some historic perspective, and I'm an early Americanist, so everything you talk about founding fathers, I'm like, yes. So right now, a lot of, I would say, millennials, and especially high school students, especially in my own district, feel kind of disenchanted in the American political system, especially with their representatives. So you do talk a lot about listening to your constituents, but where I'm coming from, I have a congressman who literally will hang up on you if you disagree with what they're saying, at least in my many phone calls experience. So how are young voters supposed to still feel like they have a say when they're being pushed back by a political system that's so grounded in two parties?
I'll tell you, the first thing is more and more millennials are running for Congress now. So you're 25. That's the eligibility, so you can always jump in and to let your voice be heard. And the second thing is really persistence. One of the things when I teach the leadership course at Williams College, we study Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence framework. And I think that's really important. One of the 5 facets is motivation. But for Army guys, it's not just hoo-ah. I mean, motivation means you got the first 6 no's. Where are you on the 7th? You're getting up and you're so, and that's what I really, Stephen's Millennial Action Project, I mean, they're constantly working issues, and they don't always get them done, but they never fatigue. So I think for millennials, it's just to stay engaged, and your time is already now. I mean, we work with Elise Stefanik, Tulsi Gabbard, Seth Moulton. There are millennials in Congress now. So, and then also I have to say this, the way you treat each other is also, I think, is generally really good. What I find in millennials, I'm raising 3, is, that's interesting, but, millennials are, Neil Howe coined the phrase. He's a sociologist, he does generational research, and he actually boldly said, millennials are going to rival the greatest generation. in terms of their contributions because of their general characteristics. They tend to be fiscally conservative, socially tolerant, very welcoming. They actually get along with their parents. Imagine that. That's a really good thing. But they have a disposition and temperament that's oriented towards problem solving. So I am optimistic. I saw it in combat. When I saw these millennials get shot at, they took a step forward. They had real courage. And I think that's important. And then when I served in Congress, I went to high schools about 2 to 3 times a month. I spent a lot of time in high schools, and I got a real chance to know these folks. They would ask great questions, and now I see it in the classroom. So that's part of the reason why I'm optimistic, is I really believe that you guys are going to be, when you fully assume the mantle of leadership, you're going to be in a position where I think you're going to solve a lot. I hope my generation, before we're done, doesn't screw it up, and it sets you up. I mean, part of the passion behind Rally Point is I really want us to tackle these problems, and that means we have to make some hard decisions. But they're not going to get easier. We have to do them together.
If I would say on that, stick with that. I mean, that's very disappointing to me to hear, because it's engagement. As a teacher, my whole goal was to get people involved. I mean, we want them in. I do these town halls where I just get the hell beat out of me at them, but that's what you're supposed to do. It's part of the job.
Absolutely.
To stand there and take it. And if you schedule it, if people come out on a snowy night in Minnesota to complain about a healthcare bill or whatever, you should stand there as long as you can, because that's a real positive that they're engaged. So I would say stick with it, and I think that always catches up to somebody. I can't imagine you can stay in Congress very long that's the cardinal sin.
I totally agree. And look,
Cardinal sin.
I took a pounding too. I mean, some of my staff here know. But the interesting thing is, if you don't show up, like I can remember one I had in Millerton. This is a small town in Dutchess County, and I didn't realize it, but by that night there were 28,000 hits on YouTube, and Rachel Maddow was talking about and it wasn't good. So, but here's the thing. Here was the story that wasn't told. The story that wasn't told is there was like maybe 200 or 225 people there, and after it was done, I stayed to the last person left, and I had about 25 people stay. That I ended up having more supporters, people who were even left of center that said, you know what, you seem to really believe in what you're doing. And, I only agree with you 3 times out of 10. But, the 3 things we agree on, you really work hard. So I'm willing to, so I wouldn't have had any. I picked up 25. I got a big black eye on Rachel Maddow, but it was all good. So you got to take your lumps. And I actually think there's a bit of an empathy factor, too. When people see you getting totally pounded, and you stand there, as you should, as a representative, I think there's an empathy factor. So I think when members don't do that, it's a mistake.
Yeah, it's a mistake.
I think it's a mistake. You just take the hits and drive on. And by the way, it's not real bullets, so we should be okay. Hopefully it stays on. All right, well, this concludes it then. I'm going to sign some books, but I just want you to know that it means a lot. You could have been anywhere tonight. You came out here, and that really means you're investing for the future. I think we have a great role model here in Congressman Walz, and I thank my good friend Dan Lipinski, too, for coming out. And I'll be here signing books, but and I'm going to give you my email address at the bottom, because I'd love to hear from you. And when you get to the back end of the book, tell me what you think, because I'd love to engage with you. Okay?
He's a real deal.
Thank
He
you.
lived it, he did it. So.
Thank you.